America is leaving Afghanistan. It's a political decision. But America does not want to leave Afghanistan to its fate. It's a tactical decision. Where does the twain meet? In Pakistan, perhaps. Pakistan is building a new military base near Afghanistan. The decision has fueled speculation. Pakistan says it will not give any military base to the Americans. The Americans say that they're looking at retaining some assets in the region. So what are their options? Will Pakistan play ball? What's in it for either side? Will China let it happen after all its commercial and strategic investment in Pakistan? And how should India read these signs? Remember, India's External Affairs Minister is on a 5-day visit to America. He's holding a series of meetings there. Are these events related? Can the Americans never give up military engagements with Rawalpindi? On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you the full story. Also on the show, India abstains from a United Nations vote against Israel. Why did New Delhi do it? What was the strategy? And who does it serve? We'll discuss. Facebook does a U-turn. It will not censor content on lab leak theory of the Wuhan virus. Last year, Facebook tagged our story as fake news. Will it apologize now, we ask? Nepal has got a 5th diplomatic mission in China, a consulate in Chengdu that India was promised but never got. We'll bring you a special report. And will robots take the jobs of MPs and MLAs? A new survey has found that more people prefer artificial intelligence to lawmakers. Can you blame them? We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad wins a 4th term in office with 95.1% of votes in an election that will extend his rule over war-torn Syria, but which opponents and the West say was marked by fraud. The election went ahead despite a UN-led peace process calling for voting under international supervision. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko is in Russia talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin amid an uproar in Europe over grounding of a passenger jet in Minsk and arrest of a dissident blogger.
It may happen that the whole air traffic control can be disturbed, or it's just a couple of individual cases. We are looking at that.
This as the EU aims to hit Belarus with new sanctions targeting its big potash exports, oil and financial sector. Meanwhile, parents of detained journalist Roman Protasevich appealed to the international community to save their son. Japan extends a state of emergency in Tokyo and other areas by around 3 weeks to June 20th as it battles a 4th wave of infections. With less than 2 months to go for the planned Tokyo Games, there are concerns of an Olympic strain of coronavirus emerging as tens of thousands of people are expected to attend the event. Jailed Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai was among 8 democracy activists to be handed new prison sentences for attending protests on the 70th anniversary of the founding of Communist China that were followed by a sweeping crackdown. Lai is already serving a sentence for taking part in earlier protests and must now serve a total of 20 months. The Austrian government came under fire for its new Islam map, showing the location of mosques and associations around the country, with religious groups saying it would stigmatize Austria's Muslim population. The national map of Islam depicted names and locations of more than 600 mosques, associations and officials, and their possible links abroad. Turkish President Erdogan inaugurated an imposing new mosque in Istanbul, fulfilling a decades-old goal of his and stamping a religious identity on the landmark Taksim Square in the heart of the city. Construction of the mosque began in February 2017, but was beset for decades by court battles and public debate. China seized 4 Christian priests working as seminary professors, along with 3 more who were carrying out pastoral work in the Hebei province on charges of brainwashing. According to a New York Times report, the incident was reported by the International Christian Concern, which monitors the persecution of Christians. The likelihood that the Earth's average temperature will breach a crucial tipping point is rising, according to the world's leading weather and climate organization. It is estimated that there is now about a 40% chance that the annual average global temperature will temporarily reach 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels in at least one of the next 5 years. Sportswear giants Nike have said that they have terminated their multi-million-dollar partnership with Brazilian football star Neymar last year because he refused to cooperate in a probe into sexual assault allegations leveled against him by an employee at the company. The incident allegedly took place in 2016 but was reported in 2018. Nike said it viewed the allegations as credible, but that its own investigation was inconclusive. Neymar has denied the claims. Defending NBA champions Los Angeles Lakers have taken a 2-1 lead in the playoff series against the Phoenix Suns with a 109-95 win in Game 3. Anthony Davis scored a game-high 34 points and grabbed 11 rebounds, while LeBron James scored 21 points and had 9 assists. The Lakers pulled away after a close first half and held off a comeback bid from the second-seeded Suns in the final quarter. This was the Lakers' first home playoff game in 8 years.
So what's the update on the pandemic front? India is slowly coming out of the woods. India has reported its lowest daily rise in cases in 44 days. For the second day in a row, India has reported less than 200,000 new cases. In the last 24 hours, more than 180,000 people tested positive. This is India's lowest count since the 13th of April. There are more than 2.4 million active cases. For 15 days now, India has been reporting more recoveries than infections. More than 250,000 people recovered in the last 24 hours. Close to 25 million people have recovered since last year. But fatalities still remain high. More than 3,500 people died in India on Thursday. The average death rate has dropped below 4,000 though. So what do these numbers tell us? The intensity of the second wave in India has reduced, definitely. We may have touched the peak already, but the virus is still very much around. South Asia at large is struggling. Reports say total cases from this region have now surpassed 30 million. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka and the Maldives together account for 18% of cases worldwide, 18, and almost 10% of all deaths. Is America setting up military bases in Pakistan? Why do we ask this question? Because American troops are leaving Afghanistan. 11 September 2021. That's the deadline for the full withdrawal. The question is, where will they go next? Are they headed to Pakistan? Why should they be? Because Afghanistan is still unfinished business. America's longest war has ended without a win for any side. And they don't want to leave Kabul to its fate. The stakes are simply too high for that. So will America watch Afghanistan from Pakistan? Recent events suggest that this is a possibility. Tonight on Gravitas, we're joining the dots and decoding the signals from Washington and Islamabad. The first piece of this puzzle is a new military base. Reports say Pakistan wants to open a new air base in the Nasirabad area of Balochistan. Why is this significant? Because Balochistan, as you can see, borders Afghanistan. Now, these plans have triggered intense speculation in Pakistan. A military base close to Afghanistan is exactly what America needs. Is Pakistan then building this base for the Americans? Well, on the record, the answer is no. Pakistan says it will not provide any base to Americans. What do the Americans say? Well, they're keen on keeping some of their troops near Afghanistan. Two reasons why. One, it will help America keep the Taliban in check. And two, American troops will be able to assist Afghans with counter-terrorism operations while also staying out of Afghanistan. This works well for the US. Recently, General Kenneth McKenzie Jr., the commander of America's Central Command, made a statement. He said the Biden administration is consulting with Afghanistan's neighbors about stationing troops. Now, this Central Command, you must know, is in charge of the war in Afghanistan. And its commander, the commander of the Central Command, says they are talking to Afghanistan's neighbors. The next statement came from David Helvey. He is a top official of the US Defense Department. And he confirmed what the general claimed. He said America is indeed discussing ways to maintain some military presence around Afghanistan. Listen to this.
We're working to reposition our counterterrorism capabilities, including by retaining assets in the region to prevent a reemergence of a terrorist threat to the United States homeland from Afghanistan, and to hold the Taliban to its commitments to ensure that al-Qaeda does not once again gain a foothold there, or that ISIS or any other terrorist group could use Afghanistan as a base to attack us.
Retaining assets in the region, he says. Let's look at the region then. Besides Pakistan, Afghanistan shares its borders with 4 countries: Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. So America does have choices, but it still sees Pakistan as its best choice. That's because Pakistan has provided a base for American military in the past. Islamabad might deny it, but it's a matter of record. In his testimony to lawmakers, David Helvey spoke about the role that Pakistan has been playing in America's wars. He confirmed that Pakistan has given overflight access to American troops, which means America can use Pakistani airspace for military operations in Afghanistan. And this is just one case. Pakistan has a history of assisting the military of the United States. And this dates back to 1959. That's when General Ayub Khan, the then dictator of Pakistan, allowed America to use an airbase in Peshawar. The Pakistani airbase was used for intelligence gathering and for spying on the erstwhile Soviet Union. Then when General Pervez Musharraf took power, he allowed America to use as many as 5 Pakistani bases. They provided logistical support for American military units in Afghanistan. This was from 2001 to 2014. That's long after Musharraf left. Officially, the United States does not have any military bases in Pakistan today. But back in 2012, WikiLeaks had found that America has, quote-unquote, several facilities in Pakistan that serve a military purpose. And this claim was described as an open secret. American special forces, too, have been deployed inside Pakistan. A leak from American embassies had revealed this in the year 2010. Small teams of U.S. special forces were secretly embedded with the Pakistani military. So for the American forces, Pakistan is familiar turf. But in recent years, their engagement certainly has declined. Reports say there has been virtually no military cooperation between the US and Pakistan since the year 2016. And in the last 4 years, Pakistan has not purchased any American weapons. You could say that's because they don't have the money. But here's another reason. Since 2016, China has also effectively replaced America in Pakistan. China is now the chief financier of Pakistan and a major arms supplier too. In 5 years, Beijing has tightened its grip on not just the economy of Pakistan, but also the security establishment. It has Islamabad and Rawalpindi firmly in its grip. Beijing is now trying to influence the future of Afghanistan too, and there are growing fears that China may be trying to replace America in Afghanistan. And China may not appreciate the presence of American military in Pakistan. So the Americans will have Beijing to contend with as they explore their options with Islamabad. The question then is, what incentives is America likely to offer Pakistan in order to get access to its military bases? It can offer to sell more weapons, that's one option, perhaps even resume security aid. And that's a sore point with Pakistan. Remember, in 2018, Donald Trump froze a package worth $300 million to Pakistan. Will they start giving this money now? American officials were asked about this. They refused to comment. Now, what if Pakistan refuses to play ball? Does America have other options? Yes, it does. In the past, US forces have been deployed to bases in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. So if Pakistan is out of the equation, which would be a good idea, Central Asia could play a vital role in ensuring stability in Afghanistan. And the path to that stability, needless to say, could begin from India, which is arguably America's most comprehensive partner in South Asia. As I speak, the External Affairs Minister of India happens to be in Washington. His first visit to the country after the Biden administration took office. Dr. S. Jaishankar is primarily there to discuss pandemic cooperation. But a host of other meetings are being conducted. And the topics range from climate change to countering terrorism to the challenges in India's neighborhood, the Afghan peace process, the stability of the Indo-Pacific, and of course, the Quad. Here's a report on the foreign minister's visit and the many convergences in the India-US equation.
He left on Monday for his first visit to the United States after the Biden administration took office. The first stop was New York, where Dr. S. Jaishankar met with UN Security General Antonio Guterres. The two exchanged elbow bumps for the cameras. Behind the scenes, they discussed solutions for the pandemic, vaccine shortages, countering terrorism, and challenges in India's neighborhood. This was the first such meeting between the two leaders since India began a 2-year non-permanent term at the UN Security Council in January this year. From here, the foreign minister left for Washington, D.C. He attended 2 business forums, the US-India Business Council, USIBC, and the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, USISPF. The focus was on pandemic relief cooperation between India and the United States. Lined up next was a meeting with US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who happens to be a close acquaintance of Dr. S. Jaishankar from his days as India's Foreign Secretary. The two leaders held wide-ranging discussions with focus on ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific, stability and peace in Afghanistan, and climate change action. After the meeting, Jake Sullivan posted this, reiterating how America had delivered $500 million in COVID relief to India. On the final leg of his visit, Dr. Jaishankar is expected to meet the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. He is also attending a series of crucial meetings with influential lawmakers from both the Republican and Democratic camps. This includes a meeting with Congressman Gregory Meeks, the chairman of the powerful House Foreign Affairs Committee, to discuss the future of the Quad. The co-chairs of the House India Caucus, Congressman Brad Sherman from the Democratic Party and Congressman Steve Chabot from the Republican Party, to promote people-to-people cooperation on the pandemic, and a meeting with Catherine Tai, the chief of the U.S. Trade Council, to enhance trade, technology, and business cooperation. The engagements only highlight how the India-U.S. partnership hasn't changed. Despite a change in administration, they are still cooperating as pluralistic societies, as market-driven economies, and as political democracies. The challenge ahead is how both countries translate these convergences into actionable change and policies. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
West Asia is counting the days. Last week's ceasefire appears to have stuck. Compared to the last war in 2014, things are looking better. Back then, Israel and Hamas negotiated 8 failed ceasefires. Only the 9th one stuck. No such back and forth this time, at least so far, which means it is time to look ahead, to dissect the war. Did either side cross the red line? Did they commit war crimes? The United Nations Human Rights Council debated this on Thursday. There was a proposal to investigate Israeli actions, only Israeli actions. This is how the 47 members voted. 24 countries backed the proposal. They want an investigation into Israel. 9 countries voted against it, and 14 countries abstained. They did not want to take sides. Now, most major countries came with a decided mind. The likes of China and Russia, they voted for a probe into Israel's actions. Both sides fired rockets, but they want an investigation only into Israel's actions. Germany and Britain voted against it. How did India vote? India chose to play safe. It was one of the 14 countries that abstained. What is India's strategy here? That's what we'll discuss. They say silence speaks volumes. What does India's silence at the United Nations say? A lot. And unfortunately, nothing good. This is not the first United Nations vote on Israel and Palestine, and it won't be the last. Every time there has been a vote, India turned up with a different strategy. If you look at the last 20 years, India's voting pattern is all over the place, sometimes supporting Palestine's right to self-determination, sometimes opposing inquiries into Israel. India is making a habit of this. Look at this year's annual UNHRC session. It concluded in the month of March. There were 15 resolutions on the table. India abstained 7 times. And some of these resolutions were overlapping. I'll give you an example. India skipped a vote on rights abuses in Palestine, but it supported a resolution condemning Israel for evictions and occupation. So what was India trying to say here? At the same session, India skipped another key vote, the one against Sri Lanka. It was quite similar to Thursday's resolution. It talked about Tamil reconciliation and accountability for war crimes. India abstained. It did not matter eventually because the resolution was passed anyway. You see, the middle ground appears to be a safe place, but it's not. History looks back at neutral players as bystanders. Only countries with clear, decisive opinions end up becoming global players. Right now, India is hedging its bets, trying to play both sides. This is a tightrope walk, one that never ends. If you stay on it long enough, you will inevitably fall. And Thursday's abstention was proof of it. This is what India said at the Human Rights Council. We remain concerned about the continuing violence in Jerusalem, especially at Haram al-Sharif, or the Temple Mount, and other Palestinian territories, and about the possible eviction process in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. So India condemns the evictions, but India is non-committal on an investigation. This is murky messaging, to say the least. You cannot reach the peak of geopolitics by sitting on the fence. So what could India have done differently? For starters, taken their hands off the abstain button. India had valid reasons to go with either side. New Delhi is one of the oldest supporters of Palestine. On the flip side, a Hamas rocket killed an Indian national. But by abstaining, India is surrendering its global ambitions. To escape the cycle of indecisiveness, India needs to look at its own history, specifically the history of non-alignment. India never supported either of the Cold War powers, but it actively engaged in the conflict. Like during the Korean War of 1950, Indian diplomats played a key role in cementing peace. Not many people know the story, but that spirit is what India needs. Active engagement without taking sides. The fear that this will somehow destroy relationships is unfounded. In the last few years, India has grown closer to Israel. But in the West Bank, leaders still look up to India as one of their long-standing allies. The whole world uses this strategy because if you think about it, Israel's biggest allies support the Palestinian cause, whether it's the US or Europe. The bottom line is this: striking a balance and abstaining are two different things. One is active engagement, the other is surrendering responsibility. For a country with global ambitions like India, a series of abstentions is a sure shot path to irrelevance. Let's look at what's happening in the neighborhood. China has its eyes on Nepal. We've known that for a while, and Kathmandu somehow does not see it. So we have decided to list it out for Nepal and explain it in the simplest possible terms. There were 3 very interesting events this week. China was a part of all of them, and none of them seem to add up. Let's begin with event number 1. On the 24th of May, Nepal opened a consulate in the Chinese city of Chengdu. Where is Chengdu? It is the capital of Sichuan. It is located in China's southwestern region. The consulate in Chengdu is Nepal's 5th diplomatic mission in China. Kathmandu has an embassy in Beijing, a consulate in Lhasa, which is in the Tibet Autonomous Region. There's another consulate in Guangzhou, which is the capital city of China's economic hub, Guangdong. Nepal also has a consulate in Hong Kong, and now there's a 5th one in Chengdu. This is the city where India was supposed to open its consulate. India currently has consulates in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Guangzhou. In 2015, India and China reached an agreement to open a Chinese consulate in Chennai and an Indian one in Chengdu. None of these have seen the light of day. But here's what did. The Nepalese diplomatic mission. What will it do? What is the role of a consulate? to issue passports, visas, paperwork, public diplomacy. Now, Nepal is a country of 26 million people, and only a handful of these work in China. So did Nepal really need another diplomatic mission in China? No, it did not. So who needs it? China does. What for? To advance its Belt and Road dreams via Nepal, and also to make a point to India. China says this mission will facilitate the promotion of trade, investment and people-to-people exchange between the two countries. 2 days later, the Chinese Communist Party was meeting and greeting Nepalese politicians across party lines. That's event number 2 that we're talking about. Nepalese leaders met their counterparts from CCP on a Zoom call, Communist Party of China. What for? What was this meeting for? Apparently to help Nepal fight the virus from China. But shouldn't a pandemic relief meeting be at a governmental level? Yes, it should be. But there's currently a leadership vacuum in Nepal. There's a minority government, and the ruling party led by Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli is foundering. Oli has lost a vote of confidence. The Nepalese parliament has been dissolved for the second time in 6 months. Elections are slated for this winter. So now China is courting all parties because you never know who comes to power next. Apparently, blind to China's designs, the leaders of Nepal are singing praises of Beijing. I have some very interesting quotes from them. Here's what former Prime Minister Prachanda had to say about China, and I'm quoting, "The deep-rooted historical friendly relation goes back to thousands of years. They're connected by mountains, rivers and culture and history. I commend the Communist Party of China under the leadership of Xi Jinping for effectively controlling the coronavirus pandemic and achieving economic recovery in the year 2020. Then we have Upendra Yadav, the leader of the Janata Samajwadi Party in Nepal. Let me quote from what he said. "China is Nepal's close friend, trustworthy and reliable development partner." I also want to read out what the leader of Nepali Congress, Narayan Khadka, said. Quoting again, "Our party is committed to one China policy and is also committed to the concept Nepal would never allow any territory to be used against China." If anything is being used here, it is the Nepalese. It all began last June with Nepal's new map making. Nepal staked its claim over Indian territories, you could say disputed territories, of Lipulekh, Kalapani and Limpiadura. This was at a time when China had engaged India in a standoff in Ladakh. China stirred up nationalistic sentiments in Nepal, pushed Kathmandu to burn bridges with India. Both Oli and Prachand wanted credit for what happened. Soon there was a split in the party. China sent its envoy to mediate between the two factions. And look where we are today. 1 year on, the Prachand faction has withdrawn from the government of Nepal. There's a leadership crisis in the country. And this comes at a time when Nepal is battling a deadly surge in Wuhan virus cases. Hospitals are running out of beds and oxygen, and the exporter of this virus is exploiting the crisis. Here's what else happened on the 26th of May. Xi Jinping called up Nepalese President Bidya Devi Bhandari. The phone call lasted 45 minutes, we're told, during the course of which Xi Jinping promised 1 million vaccine doses for Nepal. Nepal is celebrating China's outreach, completely blind to the fact that it was the dragon that created this crisis in the first place and is now abusing Nepal's misery. Here's another country on China's radar, Australia. Beijing is waging a politically charged trade war down under. Since last year, they have imposed super tariffs on Australian goods. And this is crippling Australia's wine brewers and farmers. So Canberra has decided to approach the World Trade Organization, WTO. They want an independent umpire to resolve the dispute. Last time they tried, China blocked the proposal. Will this time be any different? Here's a report.
What's rule number 1 to deal with a bully? Never suffer in silence. Always make sure to call in help. That's exactly what Australia is doing. Since last year, China and Australia have been locked in a trade dispute. There was no anti-competitive behavior, no trade deal gone sour, just good old China settling a political grudge. Beijing erected the Great Tariff Wall on Australian goods, 80% on barley imports, and a whopping 220% on wine. Both of these goods are Australian flagships, and these tariffs had no legal basis. They were hurting the economy. Australia's barley exports to China stood at nearly $1 billion. After these tariffs, the trade has effectively stopped. So Australia has called in help. The World Trade Organization, Canberra, wants a WTO panel to settle the dispute. Possibly pull up China for anti-competitive practices and declare the tariffs illegal. Can they do it? Yes, they can. But at the WTO, everything is a churn. The endless bureaucracy, the political back and forths. Experts say it could be 5 years before we have a result. So, is there an alternative? Maybe trade talks. Australia is willing to engage, but China is not. Beijing has suspended regular economic dialogue and put high-level talks on hold. For Australia, this is a consequential economic relationship. The whole trade dispute is reportedly worth $20 billion. But last year, Prime Minister Scott Morrison took a gamble. He demanded a probe into the origins of the Wuhan virus. China was furious. It responded in the only way it knows, disproportionately and unfairly. Until now, Australia has initiated 87 cases against Chinese exports, but it has barely dented Beijing's trade practices. They continue to wage political-tinged trade wars. 13 Australian sectors are under Chinese super tariffs, including beef, timber, tourism, universities, and of course, wine and barley. But one sector is suspiciously missing: iron ore. It is the backbone of Australia's economy, but China still imports it without a tariff. Guess why? Because they don't have a local alternative. This is the key to tackling China's trade hegemony: tit-for-tat tariffs. But tariff wars can be expensive. It nearly bankrupted America. So what's the solution? The same strategy as a conventional war: joint action rather than solo missions. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
They say hypocrisy is a full-time job. It cannot be practiced at spare moments. A tech giant seems to have taken this phrase rather too seriously. I'm talking about Facebook. It has taken another U-turn, one that is set to cause serious damage to its already battered reputation. First, the details. Facebook says that it will no longer censor posts which claim that the Wuhan virus is man-made or originated in a laboratory. In other words, Facebook has overturned its policy, the same policy which it used last year to censor WION and limit your access to our stories. I'll get there in a bit. First, let me tell you what Facebook says in its latest statement. In light of ongoing investigations into the origin of COVID-19 and in consultation with public health experts, we will no longer remove the claim that COVID-19 is man-made or manufactured from our apps. Now, this move comes right after US President Joe Biden's decision to investigate competing theories on how the virus emerged. US intelligence agencies have been asked to find out what the origin of the virus was. Was it a wet market in Wuhan or a laboratory in the same city? Now, Biden's decision is a step in the right direction, but Facebook's actions just expose its biases. It's an embarrassing retraction for Facebook. For 18 long months, the tech giant restricted all posts on the lab leak theory. It censored Facebook users, news channels, lawmakers, even presidents, anyone and everyone who either reported, discussed, or even suggested that the virus could be man-made. And we know this from personal experience. Facebook censored WION. It tagged one of our interviews as fake news last year. This was our interview with a virologist from China. Her name is Dr. Meng Yan. Some of you may remember this. Your paper and your co-authors have been linked to what is called the Rule of Law Society. It's a political organization. It is not a research organization. It is linked to exiled Chinese billionaire Gul Wengui and Steve Bannon, the former chief strategist of US President Donald Trump. And experts say that this affiliation of yours is a conflict of interest. What are your links with the Rule of Law Society, and why do you need the support of a political organization for a research project? The charges against, or the criticism against you is this, that you did not go for a peer review, that your study may have a negative impact on the efforts to fight this pandemic. The University of Hong Kong, where you were doing your research, said that you never conducted any research on human-to-human transmission of the coronavirus, and that your claims have no scientific basis. Why do you think so many scientists from the world over are challenging what you're saying? Dr. Yan had published a study which claimed the virus was manufactured in a lab. So in October last year, we provided her a platform to explain her claims, just as we provided a platform to her critics to make their point. We reported on both sides of the story, as you just heard, with absolute transparency and fairness. What did Facebook do? It chose to censor us, brand our channel as a source of fake news and our information as a false claim. It penalized us without properly looking at our coverage. We raised the issue, wrote to Facebook's fact-checking agency, asked it to justify the flagging. Do you know what they did? They rated our interview as partly false. So I have questions to ask tonight that could be partly tough to answer. Will Facebook take responsibility for its actions? Will there be any accountability for censoring WION? Will there be an apology for the reputational damage caused? Any action against Facebook officials for their biased judgment? We don't expect any of this. As it is, Facebook has constantly shown us that it is not a fan of neutrality. And this may not be the best of examples, but 1 year back, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, and several other Republicans had raised similar concerns about the virus leaking from a lab. All such notions were slapped with a conspiracy theory tag, and they were immediately removed. A new president is in power. He orders an inquiry into competing theories, not just the lab theory, and all of a sudden, everything is kosher. Look at the glaring hypocrisy here. They have one rule for one political view and another for a second. One rule for one news network, another for a second. Why this institutional bias? But then again, why not? If Facebook can get away with stealing someone else's idea for their platform, with leaking the personal data of its users, with ignoring hate speech and provocative content, that it can certainly get away with being biased and being a hypocrite. And while American tech giants struggle to get their act together, in China, tech CEOs are planning their departure. Chinese entrepreneurs are leaving their own companies. 3 top CEOs have stepped down well before their prime. What for? To daydream, says one of them. Our next report tells you how China's cracked down on entrepreneurs into early retirement.
Yiming was the brain behind TikTok. The app may be banned in India, but TikTok still remains a global sensation. And yet, Shang plans to leave the company he built. Why? He says he prefers to daydream instead. This man is the CEO of ByteDance. His departure might have shocked the world. But it's hardly the exception. It's becoming a bit of a trend in China. Billionaire tech CEOs are suddenly leaving their companies. In March, Colin Huang suddenly left Pinduoduo, a technology platform that sells fruits and vegetables. Colin Huang says he wants to focus on philanthropy. Before him, Jack Ma retired as chairman of the Alibaba Group in 2019 and stepped down from the company's board in 2020. In the same year, Jack Ma ran into trouble with Chinese regulators. He disappeared from the public eye. The $34 billion Ant Group IPO was called off. In April, reports say that the Ant Group was looking for a way for Jack Ma to exit the company. What is driving China's CEO out of their companies? Is it the government's crackdown? Experts believe they could be leaving to avoid a run-in with the Communist Party. The Chinese state had once hailed the achievements of big tech. Now it is cracking down on the same companies, just to keep them in line. Major players have been asked to pay billions of dollars in fines. Alibaba was asked to shell out $2.8 billion. The company was pronounced guilty of breaking China's anti-monopoly law. The fine against Alibaba was the largest corporate penalty in the history of China. Internet media company Tencent that owns WeChat faces similar charges. Reports suggest it could be asked to cough up $1.5 billion. The Communist Party has inflicted punishment on the entire industry. The question is why? China watchers say Beijing was concerned about the growing clout of the tech giants, especially privately held companies. So it brought in a new framework to control the entire sector and made an example out of high-profile companies. The crackdown began with Jack Ma and the Ant Group and swept the entire industry. By the end of April this year, China had fined as many as 11 tech companies. Billionaires have read the writing on the wall. They're leaving the spotlight. Bureau Report, World is One.
What's the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about trade? Probably these massive cargo ships with dozens of containers carrying tons of goods. Global trade has become synonymous with these metal monsters. They're heavy, they're difficult to control, and sometimes a disaster waiting to happen. Let me show you what's happening off the Sri Lankan coast. This is what it looks like. That half-sunken ship is MV Express Pearl. And all that's left is a hunk of metal, in fact, surrounded by thick black smoke. For the past 6 days, this ship was burning non-stop. The Indian and Sri Lankan Navy have been working round the clock to douse this fire. The good news is they have succeeded. The fire is out, but a lot of questions remain. How did this fire start? Was this accident avoidable? And what does it say about the world's love affair with containers? Let's start by tracking the ship's journey. It left India's Hazira port on the 15th of May. The course was set to Singapore, which meant sailing around Sri Lanka. What was the ship carrying? Chemicals and cosmetics, including 25 tons of nitric acid. Now, nitric acid by itself does not burn, but when it touches certain metals, it can cause explosions. That seems to be what happened here. The nitric acid leaked from one of the containers, and once the fire broke out, the monsoon winds did the rest. The whole ship was engulfed in flames. But this wasn't some accident. The ship's operator was aware of this leak. So why did they continue sailing? Apparently the ship tried to leave this container behind, not once but twice, first in Qatar and then again in India, but both ports did not have the facilities to store it. So instead of calling in help, the ship just sailed on. Can we then call this an accident? An accident happens through no fault of your own. This is negligence. Criminal negligence, some would say. For a good part of the last 6 days, it looked like the ship will sink. Sri Lanka was preparing for an environmental disaster. A long list of things could have gone wrong. An oil spill, another acid leak into the ocean. Thankfully, the fire was doused. But we still don't know how stable the ship is. It is apparently tilted to its right, and a handful of containers have already slipped into the sea. Controlling this blaze was not easy. Dozens of tugboats and helicopters were deployed. The Indian Navy sent 3 ships, 1 tugboat, and a Dornier aircraft. Even then, it took 6 whole days to douse this fire. And now the cleanup begins. Sri Lanka's beaches are swamped with plastic and metal bits, all from the gutted ship. Hundreds of soldiers are on the ground cleaning up this mess. It's an all-round disaster, one that could have been prevented. And for Sri Lanka, this is happening far too often. In September last year, another ship caught fire off the coast. The MT New Diamond. It took 7 days to control that blaze. Chances are this accident will follow the same template. The MT New Diamond's captain paid $65,000 in fine. The ship's owner was charged $2.4 million. A similar complaint has been lodged against this ship's captain. So there is legal precedent for what is happening. But these fines cannot reverse the impact on ecology, the long-term effects on fishing or tourism, which is why we need to re-examine cargo trade. Too many ships are making headlines. Some of them are stuck in the Suez Canal. Others are exploding off port cities. The sheer number of these containers sailing around the world is mind-boggling. And the fact is, We do not have the infrastructure to support this. Do you remember what happened in Beirut last year? There was a massive explosion at the city port. Again, same reason, no infrastructure to support the expanding trade. So when countries talk about trade deals, it's time we discuss making this trade safer too. Captains and crew need more scrutiny. Negligence must be a criminal offence because the world was lucky this time. The next disaster may be unstoppable. Now, we've been told that robots will one day come for our jobs. But little did we know that parliamentarians will be among the first to be unseated. What am I talking about? People in 30 countries want to replace some of their parliamentarians with artificial intelligence. Lucky for lawmakers, robots are not yet allowed to contest polls, because if they were, Chinese leaders would be the first to lose their jobs in large numbers. Here's a report.
Watch out, lawmakers. Robots are coming for your jobs. We can help you stop this, so listen to us carefully. People have said that given a chance, they would replace some parliamentarians with artificial intelligence. We are not making this up. Researchers recently put a question to nearly 3,000 people from 11 countries. How would you feel about handing over control to artificial intelligence? Good idea, said 51% of respondents from Europe. 66% of respondents from Spain supported the idea. 59% from Italy, 69% from the UK. We know Prime Minister Boris Johnson will not take this well. There's bad news for German Chancellor Angela Merkel too. 54% of respondents from Germany voted in favour of AI, as did 56% of those surveyed in the Netherlands. Gen X were the loudest cheerleaders of robots. More than 60% of Europeans aged 25 to 34 years supported the idea. So did 56% of those aged between 34 and 44 years. This survey is telling, but it speaks more about the loss of trust in lawmakers than people's confidence in AI. Researchers say that the result captures the general zeitgeist, the current mood, if you may. Europeans have every reason to be unhappy with their parliamentarians. Just look at the last 1 year. It began with Brexit. Then came the Wuhan virus. Europe then botched up its vaccination drive, and now it's busy fighting vaccine makers. No wonder people don't mind voting machines over men. Lawmakers still have a shot at reversing this sentiment. How? Researchers have dropped hints. For starters, lawmakers must get to know their voters, give people an insight into their work, above all, build a relationship with the voters. China looks bored. It didn't understand a word of what we just said. Transparency? Representation? What's that? Well, 75% of those surveyed in China are now vouching for artificial intelligence. Perhaps the Chinese leadership will understand this now. Beijing is currently spending more than $12 billion to push AI. Don't blame us if China makes fun cuts after watching this report. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend and stay safe.
Hey, 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 hey.